What if a respected doctor's hidden prejudice cost lives, and the only person who could stop him was an undercover agent, determined to expose his dark secret? What if that confrontation didn't just shatter his career, but forced him to face his own humanity? With the stakes higher than ever, both their worlds would be changed forever. But could a man who spent years building a reputation built on lies ever redeem himself? Or was it already too late to turn back? If you are new here, then please subscribe this channel and show thumbs up by liking the video. Now let's move to this wonderful story. Dr. Malcolm Turner walked briskly through the gleaming halls of Riverside Medical Center. His polished shoes clicked against the marble floor, a sound that echoed through the otherwise quiet corridor. The air was sterile, filled with the familiar scent of antiseptic and the hum of distant machines. It was a place of precision, control, and efficiency. It was a place that Dr. Turner had built his career on, and he was proud of it. He was known for his expertise in cardiology, a man who could save lives with his steady hands and sharp mind. Patients trusted him, colleagues admired him, and his reputation as one of the best surgeons in the city was unmatched. But beneath that perfect exterior, hidden deep within him was something that few knew, a secret prejudice that had shaped his approach to medicine and life. As Dr. Turner passed the nurses' station, he didn't notice their glances. Some looked at him with admiration, others with a sense of fear. They respected him, but they kept their distance. Dr. Turner preferred it that way. He had always been careful to maintain that distance. Personal connections, especially in a hospital setting, were too complicated. Emotions got in the way of clear decision-making. He had learned early on that keeping his feelings in check made him a better doctor. But today, as he walked past the nurses' station, something felt different. There was a quiet tension in the air. He couldn't put his finger on it, but it was there, like a shadow following him down the hallway. His mind was already focused on the day ahead. Surgeries, consultations, follow-ups. It was going to be a busy day as always. But as he stepped into his office and saw his schedule for the day, he was reminded of his ever-growing list of patients, some of them the usual faces, people who could afford his services, people who mattered. And then, there was the patient he had been briefed about earlier that morning. Tyrone Lawson, a young black man, was scheduled to come in for an appointment. He had been complaining of severe chest pain radiating to his left arm. The symptoms could be serious. Heart disease ran in his family. But Dr. Turner wasn't interested in the details. He was busy. Time was always a luxury he couldn't afford. The pain could be anxiety or indigestion, or something else easily dismissed. Probably just another case of stress, he muttered to himself as he glanced over the file. The patient's file included a family history of heart disease, but Dr. Turner wasn't impressed. He had other more important patients to attend to, and he didn't have time to waste on someone who, in his mind, didn't fit the mold of a serious case. The door to his office opened, and Dr. Susan Patel, one of the younger surgeons, stepped in. She looked concerned, her brow furrowed as she held a patient file in her hands. "Dr. Turner," she began, her voice hesitant. "We've got a young patient in the ER, Tyrone Lawson, 22 years old. He's complaining of severe chest pains. I think we should take it seriously." Dr. Turner glanced at the file, barely skimming it before dismissing it with a wave of his hand. "I'm sure it's nothing," he said coldly. "Just give him a sedative and send him home. It's probably just stress or indigestion. He doesn't need any tests." Dr. Patel hesitated, her eyes searching his face for any sign of doubt. "But doctor, his family has a history of heart disease. Shouldn't we at least do an EKG to rule out something serious?" Dr. Turner's eyes narrowed, his tone hardening. "Are you questioning my judgment, Dr. Patel?" His voice was icy, a stark contrast to the warmth she had come to expect from most colleagues. "We have limited resources and we can't waste them on every patient who walks in with a stomachache. Send him home." He saw the flicker of frustration cross Dr. Patel's face, but she said nothing more. She knew better than to argue with him. She nodded and left the office, but the unease that Dr. Turner had felt earlier in the hallway lingered in the back of his mind. He sat at his desk, looking at the patient files in front of him. Tyrone Lawson's name stood out, but he quickly pushed it aside. There were more important things to focus on. His mind returned to the surgeries ahead, the patients who mattered, the ones who could afford his care. But something gnawed at him. It wasn't the patient or the file. It was something else, something deeper, buried under years of training and self-assurance. Something he had long ignored. He had always been good at compartmentalizing, at keeping his emotions in check. It was a skill that had served him well in his career. But now, as he sat alone in his office, the nagging feeling grew stronger. It wasn't the first time he had brushed aside a patient like this. He had done it before. Ignored their pain, dismissed their symptoms, treated them as if they were less important than the others. But this time it felt different. Maybe it was because of Tyrone Lawson's background, or maybe it was because of the way Dr. Patel had challenged him. He didn't know, but he couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. Outside, his office, the hospital, continued its usual hum, life going on as always. But for Dr. Turner, something had shifted. He couldn't quite name it yet, but it was there, like a storm on the horizon, waiting to break. As he prepared for the day ahead, he couldn't help but wonder if his carefully crafted reputation, the one he had worked so hard to build, was starting to crack. And if it did, what would be left of the man he had always been? Clara Mills sat at her desk, a cup of lukewarm coffee forgotten beside her as she flipped through a stack of files. Each one told a story of neglect, of patients who had been dismissed, ignored, or worse, mistreated by the very man she had been sent to investigate. Dr. Malcolm Turner had built a reputation as one of the best cardiologists in the city, but Clara knew better. The stories she had gathered were not just rumors. They were the painful truths of families who had been failed by the medical system, by a man who had grown too confident in his own skill to care about those who couldn't afford the luxury of his attention. Clara had always believed in justice. She had joined the FBI with a simple goal: to right the wrongs she had seen in her own community growing up. Too many people, too many families had been pushed aside, their needs ignored because of the color of their skin or their lack of wealth. And now, Dr. Turner was at the center of it all. His patients had been left to suffer, and it was her job to make sure he was held accountable for his actions. She took a deep breath, scanning the files once more. The names jumped out at her: Tyrone Lawson, Maria Hernandez, James Wright. Each one had a story, a complaint that had been brushed aside by the very man who was supposed to help them. Tyrone's case, the one she had been most focused on, was the most damning. He had walked into Riverside Medical Center with chest pains and left with nothing but a prescription for anxiety. 2 days later, he had suffered a heart attack, a tragedy that could have been prevented if Dr. Turner had done his job properly. Clara's phone buzzed on the desk, breaking her from her thoughts. It was Agent Mark Thompson, her supervisor. She picked up the phone, her voice steady despite the growing anxiety she felt in the pit of her stomach. "Clara, I've got some new information. Dr. Turner is starting to get suspicious. We need to move quickly." Clara's heart skipped a beat. She had been careful, had kept a low profile, but it seemed that the walls were starting to close in. "What do you need from me?" she asked, trying to keep her voice calm. "We need more evidence, Clara. We need something concrete that will hold up in court. Your cover story is good, but we need to dig deeper. I want you to gather testimonies from other patients, get those medical records, and if possible, get Dr. Turner on tape." Clara's stomach churned. The pressure was mounting, but she knew she had to follow through. This wasn't just about exposing a man. It was about making sure this never happened again. It was about making the system work for the people who had been ignored for so long. "Understood," Clara said, hanging up the phone. She felt the weight of the task ahead of her, but she couldn't back down now. The next day, Clara returned to Riverside Medical Center, her nerves steadying as she entered the lobby. She had to keep up the act. She was Laura Thompson now, a nervous patient with vague complaints. She had already seen Dr. Turner once, and now it was time for round 2. She wasn't going to waste the opportunity. If Dr. Turner made even the Slightest misstep, it would be the proof they needed. She checked in with the receptionist pretending to be a regular patient and was soon escorted to Dr. Turner's office. Her heart pounded in her chest as she took a seat, trying to remain calm. The door opened and there he was, Dr. Turner, walking in with that air of confidence that had made him a respected figure in the medical community. He didn't acknowledge her right away, instead flipping through her medical file. His cold eyes flickered over the pages, already making assumptions before even looking up. "Laura Thompson," he said, his voice clipped. "What seems to be the problem today?" Clara hesitated for a moment, keeping her voice steady. "I've been feeling very tired lately, doctor. I'm worried it might be something serious." Dr. Turner barely glanced up from her file. "You're pregnant, right?" he said with a dismissive wave. "Probably just the usual pregnancy fatigue. Nothing to be concerned about." Clara forced herself to remain calm, despite the growing frustration inside her. "I've heard that high blood pressure can be dangerous during pregnancy. I was hoping you could run some tests just to be sure." Dr. Turner's eyes flicked over her briefly, his lips curling into a thin smile. "Women have been having babies for centuries, Laura. This is just a normal part of the process. If you're really that worried, go talk to a nurse about scheduling an appointment for some basic tests. But there's nothing to be concerned about." He didn't even offer her the courtesy of a full examination, just a quick dismissal. Clara felt the sting of his words, but she knew it wasn't personal. This was how he treated everyone who didn't fit his idea of what a worthy patient should look like. She got up from the chair, forcing a smile, and left the office. As she walked down the hallway, the weight of the moment pressed heavily on her chest. This wasn't just about exposing Dr. Turner's flaws. It was personal. Clara thought of her mother, who had suffered for years at the hands of doctors who never listened to her pain. She thought of her own child, still growing in her belly, and the world she wanted to create for him, a world where people didn't have to fight for the care they deserved. Clara sat in her car outside the medical center, her mind racing. She had to gather more. She needed more evidence, and she knew that she couldn't let Dr. Turner's arrogance go unchallenged any longer. The investigation had only just begun, but the stakes had never been higher. She wasn't just fighting for justice. She was fighting for a future where people like her mother, and like the patients Dr. Turner had dismissed, would finally be heard. As Clara looked at the folder of documents on the passenger seat, she knew one thing for certain. This battle was far from over, and the truth would eventually come to light. But it would take everything she had to make sure of it. Clara Mills walked briskly through the halls of Riverside Medical Center, her heart pounding with each step. Today was the day. Today she would confront Dr. Malcolm Turner with everything she had uncovered. The evidence, the patient testimonies, the altered records, they were all in her hands now, ready to expose the man who had played God with people's lives. But despite the weight of the files in her hands, a knot of uncertainty tightened in her stomach. She had seen the way Turner had dismissed patients, ignored their pain, and turned a blind eye to his own prejudice. He would fight back, and Clara knew that. But this time, he would be held accountable. She arrived at the door to his office, pausing for a moment to steady herself. It wasn't just about the investigation anymore. It was personal. Clara had seen how this man's actions had hurt people who were just looking for help. She thought of Maria Hernandez, whose baby had died after Turner dismissed her. Concerns. She thought of Tyrell Lawson, whose heart attack could have been prevented if only Dr. Turner had done his job. She thought of her own mother, who had suffered under a system that failed to listen to her. This was her chance to right those wrongs. She knocked on the door, and after a brief pause, a voice from within called out, "Come in." She pushed, opened the door and walked inside, her eyes locking with Dr. Turner's as he looked up from his desk. Dr. Turner didn't smile. He didn't even acknowledge her in the way she had hoped. Instead, his cold gaze swept over her and he motioned for her to sit. His office, like the rest of the hospital, was immaculate. Every surface was polished, every book and file in its place. It was a reflection of the man himself, carefully curated, perfectly controlled, but underneath it all, There was something dark, something that only those who looked close enough would see. "What can I do for you, Agent Mills?" "Doctor," Turner asked, his voice smooth and authoritative. Clara sat down, placing the file on his desk. "I've been investigating you, Dr. Turner," she said, her voice steady but filled with determination. "And I've got enough evidence to bring you down." For a moment, there was silence. Dr. Turner didn't speak, didn't move. He simply stared at the file, his expression unreadable. Clara continued, unfazed by his cold demeanor. "We have multiple testimonies," she said, her voice growing firmer. "Patients you've dismissed, people you've failed to help. Tyrell Lawson, Maria Hernandez, James Wright. These are just a few of the cases where you've neglected your duty as a doctor. And now those patients are either dead or suffering, all because of your arrogance." Dr. Turner's face tightened, his jaw clenching as he leaned forward. "You don't know what you're talking about," he snapped. "I've saved more lives than you could ever comprehend. Those people, they were just cases, nothing more. They didn't matter." Clara's heart raced, but she didn't flinch. She had expected this. She had known that Dr. Turner would try to deflect, to diminish the impact of his actions. But she wasn't backing down. "They mattered," she replied, her voice unwavering. "They were people with lives, with families, and you treated them like they were disposable. You dismissed their pain, their suffering, simply because of who they were, and now you're going to answer for it." Dr. Turner stood up abruptly, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. His eyes burned with fury as he paced around the office, his hands clenched at his sides. "I've built my career from the ground up," he said, his voice rising with each word. "I'm the one people turn to when they're in trouble. I'm the one who makes the decisions, not you, not anyone. I'm untouchable." Clara stood up too, her hands gripping the edge of the desk. "No, you're not untouchable, Dr. Turner. Not anymore. You may have built your career on lies, but today it ends." Dr. Turner stopped pacing and turned to face her, his eyes narrowing. "What do you want from me?" he asked, his voice low, almost threatening. "You think you can ruin my life? Destroy everything I've worked for? You think you can make a difference with a few files and some angry patients?" Clara met his gaze, refusing to back down. "I'm giving you a choice," she said. "You can either face the consequences of your actions, or you can start making things right. You've hurt too many people, but it's not too late for you to change. You can help those you've neglected, give back to the community you've turned your back on. It's not too late to redeem yourself," Dr. Turner scoffed, shaking his head. "Redeem myself? You think I can change that easily, after everything I've done?" Clara's eyes softened, but her resolve remained strong. "Maybe you can't change the past, but you can start by making amends. You can volunteer at free clinics, provide medical care to those who can't afford it, and donate to the programs that could help prevent this from happening again. You owe it to them, Dr. Turner." Dr. Turner's face flushed with anger, but Clara could see the flicker of doubt in his eyes. He was a man who had built his life on control, on power. The idea of losing that power, of being forced to confront the consequences of his actions, was more than he could bear. But deep down, Clara knew that the choice was his to make. The path to redemption was difficult, but it was there if he was willing to take it. He stood still for a moment, his breathing heavy as if weighing the options before him. Finally, he spoke, his voice cold but resigned. "Fine," he said, his words laced with bitterness. "I'll do it, but don't think for a second that I believe in your so-called redemption. I'm doing this for me, not for you." Clara felt a flicker of relief. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. She had won this battle, but the war was far from over. Dr. Turner would face the consequences of his actions and he would be held accountable. But for now, this small victory was enough. It was a sign that even the most arrogant, untouchable people could change, and maybe, just maybe, this was the first step toward a better future for everyone he had hurt. The cold wind blew softly across the town as Dr. Malcolm Turner walked through the gates of Bright Future Orphanage. His footsteps were hesitant, slower than usual, as though he was unsure of what he was walking into. The once sterile white walls of the orphanage now seemed more alive than ever. painted with the laughter of children, the warmth of a community, and the kindness that Malcolm had, long since forgotten. The same man who had once dismissed the value of the people here was now standing at their doorstep, preparing to fulfill his promise. The last few weeks had been a whirlwind of change for Malcolm. The meetings with Clara Mills, the constant pressure from his colleagues at Riverside Medical Center, and the undeniable guilt gnawing at him all led him to this moment. He had spent years in his ivory tower, believing that his skill as a doctor gave him the right to treat people as objects, as cases to be solved, rather than human beings who deserved compassion. But something had shifted inside him, something he couldn't ignore anymore. The faces of the children at the orphanage, their quiet trust in him, had begun to haunt his thoughts. As he approached the entrance of the orphanage, the familiar figure of Sister Evelyn was waiting for him. Her warm smile greeted him, but there was something different in her eyes now, a flicker of hope that hadn't been there before. She had seen the changes in him, the subtle transformation that he wasn't even sure he fully understood. But here he was, ready to keep his word, ready to show that he could change, even if only for the children. "Good morning, Dr. Turner," Sister Evelyn said with a smile. "It's good to see you again." "Good morning," Malcolm replied, his voice soft, almost uncertain. "I'm here to help, just like I promised." They walked inside together, passing through the familiar halls filled with the echoes of children's laughter. Malcolm couldn't help but notice the contrast between the cold, sterile environment he was used to at Riverside Medical Center and the warmth that surrounded him now. The children greeted him as he entered the recreation room, some shy, others eager to show him their drawings or share stories of their day. Malcolm set up his makeshift clinic in the same spot he had used before, the folding table and medical supplies neatly arranged in front of him. As he started examining the children, he noticed the way they looked at him. There was no fear, no judgment in their eyes, just simple trust. With every patient, he took his time, listening to their concerns, offering them comfort in a way he had never done before. He didn't rush through the examination, didn't look at the clock or wonder when he could leave. For the first time in a long while, Malcolm was fully present. One by one, he treated the children, taking the time to show them that they mattered, that their health was important to him. With each small action, a shift took place within him. It wasn't just about treating the symptoms or writing a prescription. It was about connection. It was about being there for them, listening to their stories and offering more than just medical care. It was about understanding that every child in this room deserved more than the bare minimum. They deserved his respect, his attention, his compassion. As the day wore on, Malcolm felt a sense of peace that he hadn't known in years. He wasn't thinking about his reputation, his status, or what others would say about him. He was thinking about the children, about the small ways he could make their lives better. And in doing so, he realized that he was beginning to heal too. The weight that had been crushing him for so long, the guilt from his past actions, was slowly lifting. Toward the end of the day, as Malcolm packed up his medical supplies, one of the children approached him. It was Jaden, the boy who had drawn him the picture of stick figures playing in the yard. Jaden's big eyes were filled with curiosity as he handed Malcolm a crumpled piece of paper. "Here, Dr. Turner," Jaden said shyly. "This is for you." Malcolm took the paper and unfolded it, revealing a drawing of himself, surrounded by the children of the orphanage. The sun shone brightly in the background, and the words, "Thank you, Dr. Turner," were scrawled at the top in jagged handwriting. Malcolm's throat tightened, and for a moment he was speechless. The simple act of kindness, the pure sincerity in Jaden's eyes touched him more deeply than he expected. "Thank you, Jaden," Malcolm said, his voice thick with emotion. "I'll keep this forever." Jaden beamed, his smile wide and genuine. "I'm glad you like it." As Malcolm left the orphanage that evening, the drawing tucked safely in his pocket, he realized that this was only the beginning. He had promised to change, to make amends for his past mistakes, and now he was starting to do that. But he knew that it wouldn't be easy. Redemption wasn't something that could be achieved in a day, and it certainly wouldn't be handed to him on a silver platter. But for the first time in his life, Malcolm was ready to face the challenges ahead. He was ready to prove that people could change, that even someone like him could find a new path if he was willing to walk it. The town hall meeting at Riverside Medical Center was scheduled for the following week. Dr. Turner had been asked to speak about the new outreach programs he had proposed: free clinics, medical care for underserved communities, and a cultural sensitivity training program. As he stood before the community leaders, the hospital board members, and the concerned citizens who had gathered, he felt a strange mix of nerves and determination. This was his chance to show them that he was serious about his change, about his commitment to making a difference. "Thank you for coming," Dr. Turner began, his voice steady, though there was a hint of vulnerability in his words. "I'm here today to speak about something that has been weighing heavily on me for a long time. For years, I've worked in a system that didn't always serve everyone equally. But I want to change that. I want to make sure that everyone, regardless of their background, has access to the care they deserve." There was a murmur of surprise in the room, but Malcolm pressed on, his voice growing stronger with each word. "I can't change the past, but I can do better from here on out. And I will. For all of you." As he finished speaking, he looked out into the crowd. He saw skeptical faces, but he also saw a flicker of hope in their eyes. They weren't sure if they could trust him yet, but they were willing to give him a chance. And that, for Malcolm, was enough to keep going. He wasn't perfect. He had a long way to go. But for the first time in years, he believed that change was possible. Not just for him, but for everyone. And that was a new beginning, one he was determined to see through no matter what.